Hi everyone, Ainsley here from Small Fry Creations, and this week I'm building a Hamptons style letterbox. Let me show you how I did it. You've seen it today, we are building a letterbox, and I've gone ahead and used SketchUp to sketch out the letterbox, and I'll put a picture of that on the screen as we speak. I've got my post here on top, and then I've got my timber underneath, which I'm going to use to trim out the letterbox. Our first step is to cut this post to length because it's going to be the only time that I've got it nice and square, so it's best to do it up front. I should also note that this timber is rated for outdoor use and also in-ground use, which is what I'll need because obviously the letterbox is going to go in the ground. So let's go ahead and get this to length, and then we can start to trim it out.
At the centre of this project is an 88mm square post, which I cut down to 1.85 metres. The plan was to only use the two pieces of timber you see at the beginning of this video, and we were going to purchase the bracket that holds the letterbox. However, I decided to make the bracket myself to save on cost, but it did mean I had to get a third piece of timber.
I've got my post cut, and now I'm up to the point where I want to start trimming it out, and I've taken my piece of timber and cut it in half at 1.2 metres just so that I can make them more manageable here at the table saw. Now the timber is 240mm wide, and I want to take off the rounded edges, so I'm first going to set my table saw to 235mm, rip it through once, then set it down at 230 and rip it again. That takes off the edges, gives me something nice and square to start with. Then I can go ahead and cut this in half. I can trim it to the thickness that I want to, cut it up to a number of pieces that I can then use to trim out the letterbox.
I started with removing the rounded edges and splitting the boards down the middle. This will make it easier for me to resaw the boards down to pieces that were 12mm thick. Working with the timber this way allows me to maximise the use of timber and minimise the cost. To resaw the boards on the table saw, I would have the blade start down low. I would run the board through once and then flip the board over and run it through again, making sure that the same face of the board was running along the fence. I would then raise the blade up and repeat the process until the board was resawn. I continued this process until I had 4 boards for each side of the post.
Dusty work. I've now cut all of my 12mm pieces, which is going to be the bulk of the trimming of the letterbox, and now I'm up to the point where I can work on the base. I need to take this next piece of timber that I've got and rough cut it to 450mm, and then I need to get some thicknesses of 19mm timber, which is going to form the base of the letterbox. So I'm going to go ahead and get these cut, and then we can actually start to hopefully cut in some 45 miters and bring the letterbox together. Let's go ahead and get this 450mm cut.
I rough cut the board to 450mm as it allows me to cut each layer of the base to the same width. Then I could cut them all to length at the last minute. This just helps me keep everything consistent as I trim out the post. I resawed the boards the same way as I did the others, but these boards were 19mm thick.
I've got the majority of my pieces cut to rough dimension and to their correct thickness, and I now need to cut miters, which is how I'm going to wrap and connect all of the pieces around the box. My first step is to set my table saw to 45 degrees, and then I can run through all the pieces once to get a 45-degree angle on the one side, and then I can start to narrow in on my measurements and get the other side cut. The reason why I'm using miters is because I want to be able to hide the end grain. This is going to be painted, and I'm not too worried about wood movement given the glue surface that's going to be on it, and I'll brad nail everything also into place to hold it. So I think it should be okay.
Once I have the 45 degrees on one side, I could narrow in on the measurement on the other side. I used the post as my guide and made multiple passes until it was just right.
I've got my first pieces cut for the base of the letterbox, and I need to allow 500mm at the bottom of the letterbox, which is going to allow it to be concreted into the ground. So I've gone ahead and marked 500 on my letterbox, and then I can put these pieces in. I'm going to call these the master pieces of the letterbox, because once I've got these glued and nailed into place, all of my measurements are going to come off this particular piece. So I'm going to go ahead and get these glued and nailed, and then we can start to work on the rest of the base and work our way up.
To build the base of the letterbox, I kept it simple and layered the timber onto the post. The first layer of the base was 200mm high and the top layer was 100mm high. Using exterior wood glue, I started on one side and worked my way around the post. To keep the project moving, I used a brad nailer to nail the pieces on. With the first layer in place, it was time to work on the top layer. Even though I have a SketchUp model to go off, I only use this as a guide. When measuring up the pieces, I always measure off the real thing to ensure the measurements are 100%. I used the table saw and the crosscut sled to cut the top layers to the right width. Once I had all the pieces, I could glue and nail them into place.
The base of the letterbox is all complete, and that is over there with the glue drying. So we're now up to the part where we're going to do the fancy bit, or the bulk of the letterbox. I've got my pieces of timber here. I've still got my table saw blade set to 45 degrees. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this up. I'm gonna cut 45-degree angle on one side of all of the pieces, and then I can take a measurement from the post and get that other side, and then cut all four, and then we can start to cut in the detail through the center of the letterbox. We're up to the part where we're going to cut the detail into the pieces, and I've gone ahead and cut myself a plywood spacer, which is 38mm for me in this case, and that way I can have this lined up onto the side, make a mark on both sides, and then I know I've come in the same amount from each side. Just makes it a whole lot easier and make sure that I'm even the whole way around the square. So I'm going to go ahead and mark up this as per my SketchUp model. I'm going to use a jigsaw to cut out the space that needs to come out. I did try a router off camera because I thought that might be a good way to get a straight line. It didn't work so well, so I'm going to go with a jigsaw, and as long as I go nice and slow, I'm only cutting through 12mm, I shouldn't have too much deflection. That's the plan, so let's go ahead and get this marked up, and then we can cut out these pieces.
At this stage of the project, I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to attach the letterbox to the post, so I only cut the pattern into 3 sides with the thought that I would come back to the 4th side when I got to it. I used a 10mm drill bit to drill holes into the sections that were going to be cut out so the jigsaw could slot in. Using the jigsaw worked well, and I didn't have any trouble. I just had to make sure I went slow. The design has rectangles cut out from each side, starting 50mm from the top and the bottom. I also left space about 3/4 of the way up the post for the letterbox to fit in.
The main pieces of the letterbox are cut and they are ready to be glued and nailed in place. Once I've gone through and nailed them into place, I can come back through with wood putty like I've already done here on the base plate to cover up those nail holes. Once we've got all of this into place, then we can start to work on the top cap and this decorative centerpiece, and then we're up to the part where we're going to attach the letterbox, which I think is pretty cool, and I hope you're going to like it.
I should point out here, originally there was going to be decorative pieces around 3 sides in the sections that didn't have rectangles, but when I had everything glued up, I decided it looked better without them. Just like the base, I applied glue to the pieces and nailed them into place, working my way around the post. To make the template for the bracket, I turned to my trusty engineer. She found different size circles around the house and used these to make the template. This method was not only cheaper than buying it online, but it was very satisfying to cut it out and see it come to life. I used a jigsaw to cut out the shape, and given I was cutting through 40mm thick timber, I had to go very slow to limit the deflection. Once I had the basic shape cut out, I could use an orbital sander and hand sanding to refine the shape.
The bracket that is going to hold up the letterbox is now just about done, and I have also fitted the last piece and marked out the sections that need to be cut out to match these sides. So if we just fit this in here for a second around the right way, I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the letterbox. I've also fitted a piece of timber that fits nice and snug under here, which gives me something to drill the support into. So if I place this on here, and this is just rough, I've marked out where my bracket's going to go. So it's going to sit something like this, and I'm going to cut out these sections here. Then I can go ahead and get this glued and nailed into place. I've also chamfered along the edge here, which I'm going to do on this side as well. And we're also going to spray the letterbox a different color, because this is going to be white and we want this to match the color of the house. So we're also going to spray this a different color, which we'll get to later on. But the first thing I need to do is get the jigsaw back out and cut out these sections here, and then we can get this glued into place. At the very, very end, I'm going to work on the top caps up at this end, but let's go ahead and get this done first.
I grabbed the jigsaw out again and cut the 3 sections, making sure to leave room for the bracket. It was then time to glue and nail it to the post. The client chose this American style letterbox to go with the Hamptons style post. We could only find it in white online, but that was simply fixed by spray painting it Dulux Monument to match the house. I did also undercoat with metal primer. I sanded the post up to 220 grit and I could turn my attention to the top cap. It started again with resawing the timber down to 12mm thick pieces. The cap is made up of 3 pieces, the top being 172mm squared, the middle being 152mm squared, and the bottom being 132mm squared.
I've got the letterbox roughly sanded and I have got the end caps all made, and it's got to be time now to glue and nail it to the top. So I'm going to use my spacer and apply glue and then nail this on and work my way up through the different sizes.
The post was painted Dulux white on white, and I made sure to use Dulux Weather Shield so that it was fit for the outdoors.
The post has been undercoated, but because we are using construction timber, not everything is 100% straight. And there is a couple of places where it hasn't, the top or capping that goes around hasn't completely sealed to the post on the edges, and I'm not 100% happy with it. So I'm going to use Shelley's No Gaps Fast Dry White, which is rated for the indoors and outdoors. It can seal those gaps and it can be painted over. So I think this is going to be the best solution. So we'll pop this in here and we'll get these gaps sealed.
The silicone worked perfectly and gave that nice finish touch to the post. Here comes the scary part of the project, working out how to attach the bracket and the letterbox to the post. We decided to use dowels to attach the bottom of the bracket to the post. We marked both the bracket and the post using the top and bottom of the bracket as reference points. Trying to keep the drill as straight as possible, we drilled 9mm holes. The top of the bracket is attached to the piece of wood that goes under the letterbox. We could screw this into place before placing the letterbox onto the timber. To attach the letterbox to the post, we again went with dowels. I needed to drill through the back of the letterbox and through the timber. I scuffed up the paint where I needed to apply glue so I would have a good gluing surface and glued everything into place. It's such a good feeling when solving problems and going through a stressful glue up to look at the finished product and not only be happy but be proud of the end result. It was then time to head to the install location. We dug a hole 500mm deep and made sure the post was level when in the hole. To help the post stay level while the concrete dried, we clamped timber to the post, drove timber into the ground and screwed the two together. We used 1.5 bags of concrete to secure the post into the ground. We used sticks to ensure the concrete was pushed all the way to the bottom, and we removed as many air bubbles as possible. The following day, the timber supports could be removed and the letterbox could be the talk of the street. This was a fun project to tackle with great learning and challenges to overcome. I hope you have liked this project, and if you have, help me out by hitting those subscribe and like buttons, and I'll see you on the next one.